So my family moved to Devon. I'd grown up in London and we moved to Devon when I was 18 or 19. And my way to get to know a place is to get to know its history. And I was immediately drawn to the smuggling history and how visible it still is in the landscape. You can still see from the beaches the paths used by smugglers, beaten by their feet over hundreds of years. They're still there. You can still follow them. And I found that so amazing. You can see the cliffs where they hauled barrels of brandy up on their backs and imagine that climb in a storm. And all of that just completely gripped my imagination. And I started to research the history of smuggling, research the history of the landscape and people's relationship to the landscape. I think one of the challenges and opportunities with historical fiction is that we have to try and embody our characters in their place and time and work out how people articulated their relationship to the landscape that they were living in. So part of my research was to go to Devon Rural Archive in Modbury, where they have this amazing collection relating to the land and people's relationship with the land. And I found this amazing travelogue by a priest who was working and traveling through Devon, where he described the moors and the rivers on Dartmoor and their movement to the sea. He described it as disburdening themselves into the sea. And so immediately you get that perspective into quite a religious relationship with the landscape, the idea of disburdening oneself. And you get little flavors. So he also, I felt like he was a priest who liked to tipple because he also talked about the lanes corkscrewing through the hills. And of course, those sunken lanes with the hedgerows coming over top into these incredible archways. I just wanted to find a way to bring all of that to life and to bring my character's relationship with the landscape to life. The characters have had such a grip on me. I've been writing this novel for 14 years, on and off. Obviously, other other things came and went between. But it was supposed to be my first novel, and in the end, it was my third. And it was the characters having that grip on me that meant I never let it go because there were
Yeah.
points where I thought I wouldn't finish it. The characters actually came to me walking along Bantham Beach in Devon, and I saw this cottage by the estuary, and I thought, oh, what if there was this storm? And so the novel opens the night of the great storm in 1703 with this smuggling captain, Tom West, who comes ashore in a rage because he believes his lover, Grace, has betrayed him to the revenue. And following a confrontation, he leaves with her daughter, Molly, who he raises as a boy aboard his ship under the name Orlando. And that all came to me walking along the beach. And the first thing I did actually was write it as a short story in 18th century Devonshire dialect, which unsurprisingly no one understood. So I rewrote in modern English. And then I wondered, well, what happens next? What happens when Molly grows up? What happens when she discovers the truth of what happened to her mother? And so the characters had this grip on me and held on to me through those years and demanded that their story was told. And I wanted to think about that storytelling tradition with adventure fiction. So Tom West, as you say, is this very kind of larger than life, in some ways Byronic hero or anti-hero. He's the swashbuckling smuggler, but I wanted to interrogate what is it that we celebrate in that kind of male archetype of a hero that we would condemn in a female hero? And do women even get to be the hero of their own story?
Mm.
So we have Tom and Grace in a relationship, and in some ways they're opposites. Grace wants to be a writer. She wants to find a way to have her voice heard. And that desire is passed on to her daughter, Molly slash Orlando, who grows up worshipping Tom. But the
Mm.
question is, can she ever become the hero of her own story and the owner of her own legacy? And the three of them almost battling it out with each other for who would
Mm.
get the last word, held on to my imagination for those 14 years. Absolutely. And that kind of crux is in that opening. If there's anything more frightening than God's fury, it was Tom West trying to hold his temper. We have this hope that he will hold his temper. We have this
Mm.
hope that he'll redeem himself. And I wanted to explore that complexity and to think into, as you say, that archetype that we have with
Mm.
historical fiction that we see across the genre. I'm a massive fan of Georgette Hare. We see it in a lot of Georgette Hare's novels, this kind of dark and brooding hero. but dark and brooding at what cost, and in particular, at what cost to the women around him.
Well, exactly.
And what can exactly, and what can we forgive in that behavior, and what does it take to earn our forgiveness?
Mm,
So I wanted to almost push that with the reader empathy. How far can I
mm,
get you to
mm,
empathize with this character, and how complicit does that make you in his
mm,
actions? And
yeah.
then can he change? I think that's one of the central questions of the novel. Can Tom West change? Well, I was playing with this idea, Virginia Woolf writes, "In a room of one's own, for most of history, Anonymous was a woman." And I was playing with that idea. How many female figures have sunken into the shadow when it comes to history? And can I persuade people that Tom, Grace, and Molly are real historical figures? Because they well could be. And of course, there are many examples of women dressing up as men on board smuggling ships and pirate ships. But I wanted to play also with that idea of truth and fiction, and whose stories gets believed and
Mm,
whose stories are considered too incredible. And that speaks to the title, A Wild and True Relation. A lot of women of the era would write their life stories as diaries, and they would put in some claim to truth in the title because they were so often disbelieved. So
mm,
we've got that idea of wild and true being in contention with each other. And
yeah.
then, as you say, we have these real life historical figures who interleave the novel, people like George Eliot and Charles Dickens, Dr. Johnson and Hester Thrale, Daniel Defoe and Celia Fiennes, who visited or lived in Devon, where the novel is set. And they kind of pick up this rumor of Tom and Grace and Molly, and they come together over the centuries to almost solve the mystery of Molly's life. And
Mm,
I really wanted all of those scenes to be as authentic as possible. I didn't want to put opinions into the mouths of these real people.
mm,
So they sit down and they have these great conversations about genre and gender and travel and literature and identity. But everything I have them say is something that those figures wrote down at some point in their lives, either in letters or diaries. So it involved a lot of really fun research, and then animating that and putting those people in the room together and letting them argue. And that was some of the most fun research behind the book.